Last podcast of the year. That means our final position recap of 2023. Welcome into Fantasy Baseball today on Thursday, December 28th. I am Frank Stampfl. No Scott White, no Chris Welsh. Both are off enjoying the holidays, but I've got a very special guest with me that I'll get to in just a second. Today on the show, we are recapping relief pitchers and taking a look at the state of closers in fantasy. We're going to make some early predictions on each bullpen and the latest news and notes. Mitch Garver signed with the Mariners. We'll get to all of that. But first, joining me today is a bullpen expert, the owner of Reliever Recon. He writes for The Athletic and contributes to Baseball HQ. Welcome back to the show. Good friend, Greg Jewett. Thanks for hopping on, Greg. We really appreciate it, man.
Of course, Frank, it's, known you a long time and obviously respect everything that you do. So it's always an honor to be on the CBS flagship here. So, yeah, I think this is the third year in a row doing the closer review preview.
It feels like it was just yesterday, right? We've had you on 3 years in a row. And again, I can't think of anyone better. And for anyone out there, before you make the mistake of just assuming Greg only knows about relief pitching, it's not true. He is your reigning, defending Tout Wars head-to-head champion, the man who ended my quest for the three-peat, and truly one of the great players out there. Congrats on the win. Had to give you a shout out. Obviously, back-to-back years we were facing off in the championship, but you got it done, and a job well done. You deserve it.
I appreciate that, Frank. Yeah, it's going to be a tough act to follow with the stretch you had there, but hopefully I can fare well. I know Ariel's already gunning for me, but we'll see how it goes.
I could tell you for certain that he is, because we went out to lunch a few weeks ago, and yeah, he's like, oh, that Greg Jewett, I'm coming for him. But we'll save that for another day. Make sure to follow Greg on Twitter, X, whatever you call it nowadays, at @GJewett. That is GJ. The GJ, just back to back, it kind of like throws me off a little bit. GJEWETT9. Follow him on Twitter and on X. Let everybody know what you're up to and what you offer at the Reliever Recon Patreon, because it is a fantastic tool. There's so much there to use and learn from, and I am a subscriber as well. Look, as much as we do this every single day within the season, there is a lot to keep up with, specifically in bullpens, usage, high leverage roles, closers, saves, paying attention to all of it. And you guys do a great job.
Well, I appreciate that. As Mike Curlin and a few other people that I've spoken to, we're kind of the niche specialist, I guess is the best way to say it. I try and just be a cheat code. And I've got wonderful people working with me. Nate Markham, Aaron Pags, Don Rello, I can say his name now. So, they do great work. And I'm bringing my little nepotism this year, bringing my son on board to do some more stuff with social media presence. But we just try and cover everything. Nate does an in-season solds column. So, the folks that play in that format, we don't just specialize on saves. Dom does the daily streamer for those that play in head-to-head leagues that can do daily transactions. It's a tremendous resource that he tracks down those wins and saves better than anybody that I can think of. There's a couple of spin-off things on X now that have taken kind of what he does and running with it, which is cool. It's always nice when that stuff happens. And then Aaron Pags, he heads point on all of our graphics, and he does a points league article, which is a lot of the CBS players do. So anyways, we try and cover everything. And then the closer charts that I make available, I update those daily. I try and track swing, strike percentage, which relievers might be changing in their roles and how those things are coming down the pike. As our notes are going to reflect, last year was a little calmer than it has been in years past, but, our goal and I tell you, probably the best thing we do is the Fantasy Fab 5 on every Sunday. We tailor that for the folks in the NFBC, but we give our recommendations of relievers to either add now or try to get a week or two ahead of the curve and save you those precious fab dollars, which, I learned the lesson of that in my first main event experience this year. It's managing that fab is always something that's been difficult for me. And it's something that we really try and hone in on it. And by doing those recap reports too, it really gave us a feel of how much people will be going for as the year progressed.
Yeah, and that Fab Five that you mentioned on Sundays, it's something that I read and I listen to every single Sunday before I do my Fab. So it's a great tool, and I recommend everyone checks it out. Again, that's Reliever Recon over on Patreon. Before we jump in, again, this is our final podcast of the year. Happy New Year to all, and thank you so much for the continued support this past year. It's cliche, but obviously it means a lot, and we couldn't do any of this without you, the listeners, people who watch us on YouTube, supporters. So thanks again. We really do appreciate it. Everyone, make sure you have a happy and healthy new year. Let's get into the state of relief pitching first and foremost. And you kind of touched on it already a little bit, but this year was more stable than years past. I mean, we saw 12 relievers with 30 plus saves. In 2022, that was 10. In 2021, that was 9. This past season, we saw 23 relievers with 20 plus saves. Last year, that was 18. The year before that, it was 19. So it feels more stable up top, but it also kind of feels like those could be famous last words, right? How much is something like that sticky? Is it we have new managers that took over, like a Skip Schumacher, who really kind of just leaned on one reliever and a closer in that role? Is it a combination of, relievers just pitching better, or was it just kind of like a random variance thing and you don't really know what to expect heading into 2024?
I don't know that's variance, but year to year, it's really hard to say what's going to be sticky and what isn't. But what we do see is, and one of the things that I try and focus on more than I never used to was the game finished, is like the guys who are finishing the game. I mean, it's really a simple stat, but the guy who's getting the most ninth innings or finishing out a contest for his team, and those were more streamlined. So, we keep talking about how bullpens evolve and teams want to play their highest leverage relievers in the biggest moments, but and a lot of it is going to be contractual based too. Like, Tampa Bay signed Pete Fairbanks to a very team friendly deal, and now they didn't have to worry about manipulating arbitration because they've got him signed for below market value. So they're going to use him in the ninth inning as much as possible. Now, however many innings he logs is another note for another day. But it's situations like that kind of make these things come a little more into fruition. And there was some key injuries at different points that kind of put people into those roles. Like, nobody planned on Craig Kimbrel getting the amount of saves that he did. But when Jose Alvarado seemed to be really like making his mark as the guy in that bullpen, he went down with the elbow issue for the first time, and that opened the door for Kimbrel. And he ran with it. He converted his first 16 save chances after a rough beginning of the year. He kind of settled in and did his thing. So, every team's going to have different circumstances, but you had teams like Baltimore and Cincinnati that were always like these crazy, we can't predict what's going to happen in those bullpens. Felix Bautista calmed things down. Cincinnati turned over the reins to Alexis Diaz for the season. So, as guys get a foothold and make these things happen, it kind of changes the landscape, as we saw, and things that you said. Is David Bednar going to get 39 saves again this year? We have no idea, but at least the team gave him the chance to do it. And so those are the things that we have to just kind of monitor. And a lot of it presented itself early in the season, and things kind of settled in. It was pretty much injuries that derailed people. Helsley was one of the only guys that went in the first, I think, 12 relievers taken that really didn't break even or provide a stable floor, just because, but it was injury. It wasn't performance based. It was just, he was out. So will that translate? Hopefully, but we'll have to see how all that plays out this season.
All right, let's dive into, I guess, a little bit of strategy based on different formats. And we'll start with Roto, the classic 5x5, where you have 9 pitcher spots and you could divvy them up: 6 starting pitchers, 3 relievers, 7 starting pitchers, 2 relievers. Maybe you feel a little bit more confident in your 2 closers, and so you can choose to ride it out like that. What is your ideal strategy, and has this new landscape changed it at all? I mean, maybe, in years past, you'd feel more comfortable, I have to get 2 closers early. But maybe now, the way that the landscape is set up, you say, all right, I can get a top 10 guy, and then I can wait a little bit, get a top 20 guy, wait a little bit. What's your strategy in Roto?
I try and really heed to, we can't say that like those 80th percentile numbers we like to quote are going to be the same year to year. But I try and just get myself in that. I'm trying to think of, no matter what, 65 saves between my top 2 relievers. If I'm projecting 65 saves for those guys, then I can kind of spackle in or figure out the rest. There might be a week where my starters have tough matchups, or one or two of them is going to cores and I'm going to actually play a third reliever instead, or I want to manage ratios for a week. However, you can use that last spot kind of the way that your matchups present themselves, I think has been the best way for me. And of course, Tau provides unique matchups that we can change pitchers on Fridays, which most formats can. So it's kind of it changes a little the strategy with that league as well. But for the most part, I'm thinking usually I prefer 7-2 if I can. But again, there will be weeks where I go 6-3. And there's even, some other weeks where it's 5-4 if I've got a bunch of 2-star pitchers doing with good matchups. And then I'm just going to try and make a run of the week get a couple of saves in the bank that I might not have planned on. And then I can just adjust as I move forward. And you have to really track your standings and all those things. But yeah, that's 7-2 is probably ideal. But again, your weekly matchups really dictate that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point too. And especially later on in the season, it's kind of decided for you almost, depending on which categories you need, right? If you see yourself falling behind in saves, and obviously I think you want a third or even sometimes getting a fourth reliever in your lineup. But, if you're doing well in wins and strikeouts, and I think, you're good in saves, and then you probably could look to go with a few less relievers, depending on where you are in your standing. So I think that's something to pay attention to more so in season. But okay, you like to get at least try to target for 65 saves between your top two relievers in that format. Head-to-head points. We've talked about it a little bit. Tout Wars is definitely unique in what you mentioned. You could set your lineups on Mondays and Fridays. So I think that kind of changes the strategy a little bit. But a lot of people listening here who play on CBS, they play in points leagues where you do have some starting pitchers that have relief pitcher eligibility, those sparps out there. Cole Reagan's entering next season. Nick Pivetta, guys like Frankie Montas and Chris Paddock. What is your strategy in that format? How much does it change? Do you like to get maybe one closer you trust and then try to get a few sparps that you mix in? What do you think about head-to-head points leagues?
Yeah, I had that on my mind, and this year in our auction, that was definitely. And then I think after one of them went off the board, people were like, "Oh, wait a minute!" And they kind of scrambled at the last second, not realizing that we could get those relievers in that spot. So I won't be able to have that in my back pocket this year, though I won't be competing with you for like Zach Eflin and things of that nature. So, yeah, it's a definite. And again, as we said with the matchups, you look at the thing: how many starts do I have? Do I need? Where can I get those points? I was fortunate enough to get Felice Bautista last year, and then I thought I was doing myself a favor getting Christian Javier as my spark guy, but that didn't work out that terrifically as the season progressed. But yeah, the names you mentioned, I was fortunate to add Nick Pivetta during tout. That was a big pickup, and again, my guy Dom, the bullpen guru at reliever Recon, was touting him. I added him because I just wanted him to be in there to get those vulture starts, but they eventually put him in the rotation, and he had a pivotal start in our last matchup there. But so they definitely have more value in that form of a setup. And I know people in Yahoo head-to-heads also like to use that too in their matchups. If you can get a guy with reliever eligibility that gets you a start or can get you those extra counting stats in those matchups, it can be huge. So I don't want to overvalue them, but you can't ignore them either.
Yeah, specifically in the CBS format, head-to-head points leagues, here are the top names that have starting pitchers as relief pitchers in 2024. Cole Reagans, Michael King, who's now with the Padres, Nick Pivetta, Ryan Pepio, who's now in Tampa Bay, Chris Paddock, Nick Martinez, and Frankie Montas. I think those are the most notable names up top if you're looking for sparps. And I think something else that's kind of interesting too, because people have asked me about this in the past. If you play on Yahoo in a daily lineup head-to-head categories leagues, some people like to get relief pitchers that have starting pitcher eligibility, because that adds another factor as well. So it'll be, I don't know, just throwing out like Robert Stevenson. If he just randomly had like starting pitcher eligibility, you can throw him in there in a Yahoo daily categories league, and he can get you reliever stats too. So just kind of trying to find different ways to fill out your lineup. And as we get closer and more rankings lists come out, I'll be able to go through Yahoo and find out which names have that eligibility. And again, once we do like our relief pitcher position preview, I'll bring all those names to light. But it's something that people have asked about before, and I think it's something that if you play in that format should be on your mind as well. Lastly, I do want to ask you a little bit about saves plus holds because it has grown in popularity over the past couple of years. You mentioned that you guys put out an article and you give out targets for solds, saves plus holds. Some people play in leagues where they just have a saves category, they just have a holds category, but it has grown in popularity over the past couple of years. Do you have any specific strategy or relievers that you target? Because for me, it was always I didn't mind playing saves plus holds because it puts more emphasis just on the best relievers. You can just draft the guys that are the most talented relievers. You don't have to worry about saves. They're not as scarce because obviously the holds factor in there. You could just focus on talent, which I do like that aspect of it. And obviously on good teams, obviously they're going to win more games. So more opportunities for saves and holds, but any strategy when it comes to those formats.
Yeah, well, you hinted at a couple of them. I mean, you want teams that don't have starting pitchers that go super deep into games. So, Tampa Bay is always a team like last year. You would think San Francisco would have been better for them last year, but they weren't. It was kind of a weird. They ran a different, they ran odd rotation. They weren't as bountiful as you would have thought they would have been for them with the Rogers twins and Doval. But yeah, you want teams that are good and teams that play close games. That's the hard part is like you can't predict which teams are going to be because year to year, like I can cite the Astros, usually they're pretty good. And there was 2 years ago they were very scarce with save situations because they were blowing teams out. And then last year saves are piling up for Ryan Presley. So on a year-to-year basis, it's hard to predict all of those, but in season, you can kind of see those trends and zig pretty quick. But yeah, you're usually targeting teams that are winning 80, they're projected to win 85 games or more. You want to get the guys in those bullpen because they're going to be racking up the most holds in those situations. And the biggest key is if you get a team that has a very stable leverage layer with X in the 7th, Y in the 8th, and Z in the 9th, then you can get X and Y and still rack up the solds or the holds in a separate category as they go. And as you say that, the last couple of years on The Athletic, I do a weekly saves rankings, which, I'm not a big fan of rankings. However, but we also do a separate column or a separate sheet for the solds. And people say that they use those all the time. That's like, I'll be in there updating them at 7 in the morning, and there's already people like logged in because they bookmarked it from the week before because I update the same sheet over and over. And I'm just like, these people are crazy. But if you're in an ultra competitive league and you want to get the jump on the next guy that's going to be getting the 7th inning for a very good team, then that's a key thing to know when those situations are like that.
All right, well, let's get into the top 10 from this past season. And this is based on the CBS 5x5 Roto algorithm. You might look somewhere else, maybe Razzball Player Rater. Things are moved around a little bit differently. But if you play in a Roto or a categories league on CBS, these are the top 10 relievers from this past season. Worth mentioning, first and foremost, Felix Bautista was the top reliever in fantasy this year, but will miss all of 2024 due to Tommy John surgery. So we move one down further. And outside of him, the number one reliever was Devin Williams, who had a masterful year, 153 ERA, .92 whip, 36 saves, were tied for 5th most in baseball. 8 wins definitely helped that Roto ranking as well. Few things that I did want to point out that could potentially be worrisome. I noticed the fastball velocity has dipped down a little, over 1 miles per hour the past 2 seasons. Clearly, it hasn't affected his stuff. He's still amazing. But I think vhenever we see these velo drops, it's worth mentioning. And we've heard for years now that he could maybe be traded. The Brewers, we're still kind of up in the air on like what their situation looks like in 2024. Do they trade Corbin Burns? If they do that, maybe they traded away at Devin Williams. So these are things that are kind of in the back of my mind. But your thoughts on Devin Williams's 2023?
His 2023 was fantastic. I'm thankful that we were a little bit higher on him than other sites. I think we believed in him. The airbender, thankfully, the changeup makes up for the velo loss that you're referencing. There was a couple of times he was a little bit more hittable this year, if that makes any sense. But there's a couple of games you watched them where he gave up a home run or things of that nature. But that's going to happen. But from all the other now, as you were referencing, he's entering the same arbitration window where they traded Josh Hader. So they may not do it initially, but there is definitely a chance if they trade Burns before the season starts, or if they're at the trade deadline and Milwaukee is not going to be vying for a postseason spot, they pretty much have to sell or trade Burns. And if they trade Burns, then they're likely going to turn around and trade Williams. I mean, they have people in that bullpen that they could elevate their roles. They've kind of got a nice pecking order built up behind them. So, this would be it. You don't want to. I've said on different places that if I was Texas, I don't know if I would overpay for Hader. I would rather trade for Williams. I'd be calling Milwaukee every day until they finally get sick of hearing from me and do a deal, because, well, the Rangers they match up pretty well on prospect capital versus what they would need to get back for Williams. Then you can sign him to a long-term deal, and then you're not worrying about overpaying for Hader. But that's another story for another day. But yeah, there's a very good chance he gets traded. But the good thing is he should be the closer where he ends up. But there's a chance that the team just gets him and they want to use him in the 8th inning.
Yeah, so there is, I guess, a slight risk because of that. But the early ADP, people don't seem to be worried because the ADP is 38.4 for Devin Williams, the top reliever being drafted in fantasy right now. The number 2 reliever this past season was Alexis Diaz. His first full year as the closer was a success. 3.07 ERA, 119 whip, 37 saves, the 4th most in baseball. 9 wins as a reliever, tied for 3rd most among qualified relievers. Again, definitely helps out that final ranking here at the end of the season. Control has been an issue the first 2 seasons. I think you could say that for a lot of relievers. They throw hard, sometimes maybe a little bit erratic. I noticed in the second half, he took a pretty big step back as well. 4.61 ERA, 5.6 walks per 9. The K- walk rate was a disaster. They were using him a lot. So how much does that worry you about Alexis Diaz heading into 2024? He's currently the 9th reliever off the board.
What I'm worried about is, Cincinnati, the only person they added to the bullpen was Emilio Pajan. So I don't, Fernando Cruz showed some good swing and miss stuff, but he's like either he mows down the side in order or he gives up 4 runs. There's like no in between. That guy's pretty volatile, but there is upside, although he's 32 years old. So we don't know if a guy's going to be able to repeat that sort of a season. I really think the usage patterns that you hinted at really wore him down. He looked very tired. And when they were fighting for a playoff spot, they were just putting him out there almost every day. And one of the stats I like to reference was that you talked about his final ERA. Through his first 66 outings, he had a 2.10 ERA. And then his last, from September 15th on, he just got obliterated in a couple of outings. And that just totally, it inflated his ERA by almost a run that last stretch of the season. But again, he was running on fumes. So I would hope that they give him a little bit more rest. Maybe having someone like Pagan around will help him understand a little bit better about pacing and not throwing, using too much energy in the first half and saving some for the second. And we forget that in his breakout season, he had a little bit of time off, and that's why he finished the season so strong. So I just don't know if we just need to manage his workload better or if it is a matter of the command issues that you're referencing. I like him. I just don't know where he's currently going in ADP. I might prefer to be elsewhere just because of the ratio risk that you were hinting at.
All right, let's take our first break. But first, a quick programming note that heads up starting next week. We will be releasing 3 podcasts per week, and then that will jump to 4 per week in February, 5 per week in March, so on and so forth. I'm very excited to have pitching extraordinaire Lance Brazdowski joining us on next Tuesday's podcast. So make sure to check that one out. Again, 3 podcasts per week starting next week. Let's take our first break, and when we return, we'll continue recapping the relief pitchers here on Fantasy Baseball Today.
The Scudetto, where the soul of Italy meets the pinnacle of calcio. Catch Serie A on CBS Sports Network and streaming live on Paramount+.
Welcome back in. Let's continue on recapping relief pitchers from this past season. The number 3 reliever was Camilo Doval from the Giants. 2.93 ERA, 114 whip, 39 saves, tied for 2nd most in all of the league. Velo remains top-notch. We're talking elite. I myself was nervous about Camilo Doval entering last season. Had some control issues in the past, and Gabe Kapler, I always kind of worry about Gabe Kapler. But to your credit, Greg, I remember last year you were not worried about it. You were a fan of Camilo Doval, and now he's the 5th reliever off the board. And I think he has earned that. I pretty much trust in him at this point.
Yeah, and he also had a rough patch where he stopped throwing his slider. It was really weird, which is like his best swing and miss pitch. I don't know. There was something going on with him and Kapler. It was hard to explain, but he blew 4 saves in a row, but he still was able to save 39 games last year. So yeah, overall, I'll take the win on it. He was my preseason like number 4, and our friend Lucas Bieri said he had a lot of Doval because of what I was saying on Recon. So I appreciate that. I'm happy it helps out those of us that support us. I would like to see that slider be more consistent, but he's a guy that I think people remember the second half more than they should. He could end up being at a pretty nice price point depending on where he finishes up as we get towards the early March and see where that really settles in.
Yep. All right. The number 4 reliever was David Bednar from the Pirates. Awesome breakout season, a 2 ERA on the nose, 39 saves, again, tied for second most. How much of that do we trust year over year? It's so hard to predict because the Pirates, they got off to a great start last year, and then obviously they fizzled in the second half. You have to assume they're probably going to be a little bit better again this year. They'll continue to improve, but how many close games will they have? It's just so hard to tell year over year. The one thing we know, David Bednar is awesome. He's really, really good. And like Devin Williams, we've kind of heard some rumors, some whispers here. The Pirates going to trade David Bednar. He's under team control through 2027. I mean, they could look to do that and ask for a ton in return, or they could just continue to have one of the best closers in the game. How much of that trade risk? I don't even know if it's risk, but how much does that worry you when it comes to David Bednar?
It doesn't worry me too much. I truly don't understand this front office. Why? He's from Pittsburgh. I mean, he comes out to the Steelers entrance song, the Renegade. So, I mean, why wouldn't you offer this guy he would give them a hometown discount. I still don't understand why they just don't offer him like a 3 or 4 year deal and then remove all of the specter of these trade talks. But it's the Pirates, so it's kind of up to them. But that would be something I would really appreciate. I don't know. 6 one way, half a dozen the other. They could trade him. I said 2 years ago they wouldn't. So luckily I got lucky there. And last year I said they wouldn't. This year I don't know. I truly don't know what the direction this team's going to take. Maybe some of that depends on the arrival time of Skeens and however the other stuff goes. But if they're doing well and building, you would think they'd want to finish strong in the second half and use him as a building block moving forward. I don't know. It's a coin flip right now.
Yeah, 8th reliever off the board for David Bednar. And I think if we had that assurance, if he had that contract extension, he probably would be going even higher, maybe even like a top 5 or 6 reliever, but maybe just that sliver of doubt that some people have. When he's on the field, he's amazing. But again, there is that just slight risk and doubt that David Bednar could be traded. The number 5 reliever this past season might surprise some people. Tanner Scott of the Marlins, 2.31 ERA, a .99 whip. He had 12 saves, 9 wins, 104 strikeouts, were 3rd most among relievers. He took over in the second half as the Marlins closer. And as I mentioned up at the top, Skip Schumacher comes in for the Marlins, does a great job. And he basically just relied on one guy. It was AJ Puck earlier on in the season. He started to fade, and then they went to Tanner Scott. The biggest key with him, as I'm sure you know, Greg, is the control. It improved dramatically. We're talking the first 6 years of his career, 5.8 walks per 9. This past season, 2.8. How much can we trust that is the question with Tanner Scott.
You would think there's going to be a little migration to the mean, but man, from August 1st on, he had a 33-3 K to BB. I mean, that number just jumps off the page. I mean, I know we've let people sucker us in before. But he's another guy too. We want to talk about a trade risk. I mean, he will be a free agent at the end of the season. So depending on how the Marlins are doing, he could be somebody that's moved at the trade deadline. But if you can get 20-ish saves before they move him and his role might change, I still think that would be a win from a fantasy standpoint, especially, as you referenced with the strikeouts. He led NL relievers in strikeouts and was 3rd overall. So, I mean, I think 5 relievers last year had 100 plus strikeouts and he was one of them. And those don't fall out of trees anymore. It's not commonplace.
He is the 17th reliever off the board in early ADP. Does that sound like a fair price tag for you on Tanner Scott?
Yeah. Especially if we talked about our strategy for closers, but I mean, like when you're cobbling together, if you take like Emmanuel Clase because you think you're getting a stable save person, And now you can get Scott for strikeout upside. They're like a nice little package deal because you kind of get the best of both worlds from two closers when you combine them together. So now I'm getting towards even if Scott gets 20 saves, I'm getting towards that 65 threshold that we talked about. And Scott's strikeouts pick up for where Clase's don't, you know what I mean? So how you mix and match those two closers really can depend on how you do things. Or if you take a guy with better strikeouts and then you add Scott to him, that can help you if you take like a George Kirby as your second starting pitcher who doesn't get the amount of strikeouts that other number twos might. So how you build your team really factors into all these things.
All right, the number 6 reliever was Craig Kimbrel. This past year, he was on the Phillies, now signed with the Baltimore Orioles. Getting up there in age, turns 36 in May, but still had a fine season, 23 saves, 8 wins with the Phillies. Pretty shaky in the postseason. I know let a lot of Phillies fans down, unfortunately. But the ADP, since he signed with the Orioles on December 6th, 119.8 as the 18th relief pitcher off the board. And I swear I'm not just saying this to give myself a pat on the back, but the day he signed, I'm like, he's moving up inside the top 150. There's no doubt in my mind because he's going to be the closer for the Orioles. How confident are you with Craig Kimbrel, in Baltimore?
We were in lockstep about that because when I wrote about that on Recon, I said you can already look at where his min pick is and you just move it up into that range. The funny thing is we want to poo-poo on Kimbrel, but he was one of 2 relievers last year with 20 or more saves and 90 or more strikeouts, him and Felix.
Wow.
So, he's not perfect, and I think you're going to need make sure that you have a portfolio that's not risky with ratios. But, if he gives me a 1.15 whip and he gets me 25 saves with the Orioles, I'm going to be happy. Now, the Orioles do have a very deep and fluid bullpen. So his struggles last year were mostly against left-handed hitters. So, they've got 3 lefties in that bullpen right now, depending on what they do with DL Hall, that can all help them. So like if the lefties are up in the 8th inning, they can use those guys to mitigate them and save Kimbrel and kind of smooth out his matchups. And I think that bullpen's also deep enough where, Kimbrel showed, I think, he's 36. Of course, he's going to get tired during the postseason. I think the Orioles can do a little better job of managing his workload. I don't think their bullpen was as thin as the Phillies was near the end of the year. Again, with the injuries the Phillies had and the other stuff, I think it was just a little bit of erosion with his age. So, he's not perfect, but for what Baltimore needs is a 1-year fill-in to get back to the mountain. I think that was a savvy signing.
He just feels like, for me, he's the typical RP2 that I like to target. Typically, I like to get someone in like the 5 to 10 range, one of the Bednars, maybe Alexis Diaz, maybe even like a Ryan Presley. I know he goes a little bit outside the top 10, and then come back a little bit later on and get like Craig Kimbrel as my 2. He just feels like that prototypical second closer in fantasy in a categories league. The next 2, I'm going to throw 2 names your way here because I do want to get to some news and notes and some other things with bullpens, but 7 and 8. Actually, pretty polarizing, I guess you could say. Number 7 was Emmanuel Clase with the Guardians. Number 8 was Josh Hader, who is currently a free agent. Clase led the league in saves, 44 saves. Also led the league in blown saves with 12 blown saves this past season. The strikeouts, the swinging strikes, they plummeted this past season. The swinging strike rate on his slider went down a lot. The velocity dropped a little bit on that slider, about 1 mile per hour. And we have heard some whispers, Emmanuel Clase's name being kind of thrown out there in some trade rumors. So, look, I still think he's one of the most reliable guys, but it was kind of a weird season for Emmanuel Clase. And then Josh Hader bounced back tremendously, right? He had an ERA over 5 in 2022. This year, a 1.28 ERA, 33 saves. We're waiting to find out where Josh Hader is going to sign. My guess is that he will be the closer no matter where he goes, the Dodgers, the Rangers, whoever else wants to get in the mix. Give me your thoughts here on what the heck went wrong with Emmanuel Clase. And I say that he led the league in saves. And I don't know, maybe some predictions on where Josh Hader could wind up.
With Clase, the cutter velo is down slightly. So I think that's something we want to watch. At the beginning of the year, it was cold weather, and we thought it would take him a little time to build up, but it never reached. He didn't average triple digits for the first time. Now, again, he's only entering his age 26 season, so it's, I'm not gonna downplay the guy. I just don't think that. I think we kind of hope the second half of 2021, the slider was like really, really dancing. He was getting a lot of swings and misses. I was like, hey, if he throws more sliders, we might see more strikeouts. And then he's kind of plateaued. I mean, his K percentage is his K percentage. I don't think there's really room for growth there. But Eno Saris rated his slider highly in his best pitches of the year column, which I was a little bit surprised since, as you cited, his slider was not as effective last year. But this is almost like the thing where everyone kind of like, we pushed him too high last year, and I think he might be a little bit too low this year. But you can buy the dip, and hopefully you can pay off. The Hader rules will be interesting where he goes. I think the thing that surprised me the most was that he matched his career high in appearances with 61. I think we feel like our closer should be a little bit more durable, or maybe get, you look at steamer projections, it's always, 65 innings. He's not a multi-inning pitcher anymore. There was a couple of times he refused to go in when the Padres were not in the playoffs, and I think that rubbed a few people the wrong way. Once he gets his contract, you would think he wouldn't be saying, I don't feel like pitching today, but I just think you have to weigh that in there. He's not as bad as he was in 22, and he's probably not as great as he was last year. Just kind of plan for somewhere in the middle of those two seasons, and you'll be okay. But where he goes will definitely set the template for his save floor. Everyone thought it was going to be Texas. There's been whispers about LA, and originally people were saying no about the Phillies, but suddenly it seems like since they got spurned by Yamamoto, that the Phillies are kind of back in thinking they can shorten games with their bullpen. And then if they have a stable force at the back end like Hader, they can use Alvarado wherever they want. So the Phillies are my dark horse in this scenario.
I think the team to watch too is the Cubs, because obviously has some familiarity with Counsell as well. And look, Alzolay did a great job, and I think he could probably be fine as their closer to open the year. But man, if you can have Alzolay as your 8th inning guy and Hader as your closer, why not? Right. And the Cubs haven't really made a splash yet this offseason. I think that is a direction they could go as well.
Yeah, that's a good call. Yeah. And he's got ties with Counsell, so he'd be comfortable going there. When he first got traded, there was a lot of personal issues going on when he went out to San Diego, and I think that really skews his numbers from that season. And I was on record with the Athletic saying, don't worry about this. It's just a blip.
Quick follow-up. Who would you draft first right now? If you're on the board, you need a closer. You going Josh Hader or Emmanuel Clase?
Probably Hader, just because I want the strikeouts.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, number 9 and 10 from this past season, Jordan Romano with the Blue Jays and Raisel Iglesias of the Braves. Romano, 36 saves. Was on the IL for 17 days due to lower back inflammation, but velocity and pitch mix was fine. Really kind of seems like he's settled in as a pretty safe, top 10, top 12-ish closer at this point. And Raisel Iglesias, solid season with the Braves, 2.75 ERA, whip a little bit elevated, 119, but he had 33 saves. K- walk rate still good. Swinging strike rate, 11th best among qualified relievers. The only thing that worries me a little bit about Raisel Iglesias, the Braves bullpen is really, really good. So there are many different options there. And I guess if he falters, they could go in a different direction. But any quick thoughts here on Romano and Raisel Iglesias?
Not too much. The Braves are one of the most stable bullpen places around. They let Kenley Jansen stay in that role for too long. They let Will Smith. I understand your worries. My worries with Raisel is if there's any flare up with that shoulder. But for him, if he stays healthy for a full season, that could be the first time he gets 40 saves in his career. That's, we all know how good Atlanta is. It's just a matter of him being available. If he's available all season, I think he can finally break that threshold. And again, he's kind of undervalued in early ADP. So it just kind of depends. But again, if I have Raisel, I don't want my second closer to be a risky one. I want it to be somebody that I can rely on for 25 saves.
All right. Well, I guess, I'm thinking about it now. I did a draft champions out at First Pitch, Arizona. Mind you, this is the first week of November. I didn't have any rankings done or anything. Everyone's kind of flying blind at that point. And I got Iglesias, I think, in the 6th round of a 15-team league as my first closer, which is fine. But now hearing you say that, my second closer wound up being Kyle Finnegan. So I'm like, probably not the best combination of relievers there. But, we still got like half the draft to go. So maybe I can snag a few relievers later on as well. Let's quickly hit some news and notes before we make some predictions on each bullpen. And we got some catcher news. The Mariners signed Mitch Garver to a 2-year, $24 million deal. And not sure he'll actually play much catcher, but he has catcher eligibility for fantasy. Obviously, the Mariners have Cal Raleigh and Sebi Savala as their catcher tandem there as well. But I think an everyday DH role, maybe he kind of mixes in as like, a second or third catcher on the Mariners here or there. Playing DH should actually help his value. I think he'll get more plate appearances than the average catcher. Garver, the problem is health. I mean, it's not a matter of like how good he is. When he's on the field, he's really good. I mean, he hit 270, 19 homers in just 87 games this year. He has a career 825 OPS, 123 WRC plus. He just has not played more than 87 games since 2019. So I like the skill set. It's just, can he stay on the field? Greg, what are your thoughts on Mitch Garver to the Mariners?
Yeah, I agree with you. And it was weird when I was looking up his numbers. He only hits like 217 when he's the DH. It's like he hits higher when he's a catcher. So, some guys, that's just, as he gets used to it, hopefully he'll acclimate to that role and he can. And of course, they've got Edgar Martinez up there. He can come in spring training and kind of talk him through some of that stuff, how to stay prepared. From where he's going, and anytime you can get a catcher eligible player that's not going to be catching for the most part, then you're thinking you're doing well. So I'm not sure how much this will drive up his ADP just because of all of the risk issues, but in that range where you were talking about in our show notes about where he's going to go, I mean, he's a pretty alluring option, especially if you're waiting at catcher, which a lot of people like to do.
Yeah, the early ADP for Mitch Garver is 203.6, 17th catcher off the board. I think he'll climb up a little bit. We usually see once players sign, they kind of get a little bit of a boost. And I was looking at like the 170-ish range where you see names like Bo Naylor, Jonah Heim, Logan O'Hoppe, Caber Ruiz. You think Mitch Garver deserves to be in that range or maybe even ahead of some of those names?
No, I think that's a pretty fair place to get him. And again, now it's build thing. If I'm looking to get, I do like O'Hoppe, so that would be a tough choice between the two of them, but that's not a bad thing. Like if those two are in my queue and one of them goes, I can have the other as a fallback option. That's not a bad place to probably grab your first catcher in that little pocket you were referencing.
And I think they could have similar skill sets too. Logan O'Hoppe and Mitch Garver, middling batting average, maybe like a 250 kind of guy, and really good power from both of those as well. The White Sox signed Martin Maldonado to a 1-year deal, which doesn't really matter for fantasy, but it'll be interesting to see how their catcher situation works out. They also traded for Max Stassi. They traded for Corey Lee during the season. So they do have some options here. I guess we'll find out which of those two winds up on the active roster here on opening day. But again, Martin Maldonado to the White Sox. The Blue Jays have made some moves. They signed Kevin Kiermaier to a 1-year deal worth approximately $10 million, slated to be the starting center fielder once again for them. And they also signed Isaiah Kiner-Falefa to a 2-year, $15 million deal. My guess is IKF, super utility role, something like that. They have Davis Schneider at second base for now, Kevin Biggio at third base. So not really anyone that's either proven or has been great the past couple years. So maybe IKF works in a little bit. My guess, Greg, is that the Blue Jays are probably not done this offseason. They've got another move up their sleeve here.
Yeah, their fan base was pretty upset if this was it.
Yeah, for sure. The Guardians acquired outfielder Esteban Florial from the Yankees in exchange for Cody Morris. So a swap of former top-ish prospects. I don't know that either of them was really a top prospect, but they were prospects. So maybe it could work out for either one. Again, Florial to the Guardians, Cody Morris to the Yankees. And the latest on the rumor mill, the Dodgers, who have signed or traded for everybody this offseason, are interested in Teoscar Hernandez. So could potentially be their a corner outfielder, because we know he's not going to DH. They have Shohei Ohtani. But if Teoscar wound up with the Dodgers, that would be a pretty big boon to his value. So we'll see if that actually winds up happening. Let's take our final break. When we return, we'll way too early predictions on each team's opening day closer. We'll do that right after this.
There's more than just pride on the line. It's a top-of-the-table Old Firm derby. Celtic, Rangers, Saturday on CBS Sports Network.
Welcome back in. Let's make some way too early predictions on each team's closer on opening day. And for this, Greg, I mean, the ones that are obvious, I don't think we have to spend too much time on. The ones that are completely up in the air, all right, we can have a little conversation about it. We'll start in the National League, and we're going in alphabetical order in terms of the city that they play in. So we will start with the Arizona Diamondbacks, and very obviously Paul Sewald, right? Nothing else to add there, really?
No, other than, he's also on an expiring contract, so you might just want to handcuff him with Kevin Ginkel, depending on the format of your league.
All right, the Braves, we already spoke about Raisel Iglesias. The Cubs, as of now, it's Adbert Alzolay, right?
As long as he's healthy, which has always been his issue.
Yeah. If he's not healthy, who would be your guess next man up in Chicago?
It should be Merriweather, but they didn't use him like that when Alzolay was on the IL. That was such a confusing. I think that's part of the demise of David of Ross and why he's not back as manager.
Mm-hmm. For the Reds, we know it is going to be Alexis Diaz. They did sign Emilio Pagan this offseason, but very clearly Diaz just came off a great season. For the Rockies, question marks. Not really sure it matters. I don't think they're going to be very good, and obviously closers in Colorado doesn't usually work out very well, but my guess is the top two options, Tyler Kinley and Justin Lawrence.
Correct. I lean slightly towards Kinley just because they like to use Lawrence as the highest leverage guy, and he can also do multiple innings, which Kinley cannot. But, Kinley did have 5 in September, so I guess we're playing a recency bias game. I just don't know if they're going to go out and do a free agent signing like they did last year when they got Pierce Johnson. They kind of came in at the last minute and just got an upside guy.
All right. The Dodgers, I think for now it's Evan Phillips. Do they sign somebody? Do they trade someone? You agree on Phillips?
It's Phillips unless they sign Hader or trade for Clase.
Yep. Then for the Marlins, Tanner Scott, right?
Yeah. Bender will be coming back, but he's coming back from surgery, and we don't know how his command's going to be, but they should use Scott as much as possible unless they're, to build up his trade thing if they're going to move him at the deadline.
For the Brewers, it's Devin Williams. If they trade Devin Williams, who would be the next man up?
I think we differ here because I think it's going to be Uribe, and I know you like Joel Payamps, but that's another story for another day.
Yeah, or in about like 10 minutes from now when we give out some very late round targets. Look, you're the guy to know. So if anyone would know, it would be you. And I've heard very good things about Uribe as well. But obviously, Payamps has looked really good as well. Would he get the role? I don't know. Wait and see. For the Mets, Edwin Diaz is returning from that knee injury from last season, but very clearly will be their closer. For the Phillies, assuming they don't sign Josh Hader, this one feels kind of open. Maybe. I don't know. Maybe you just trust Jose Alvarado, but I know Jeff Hoffman did some good things. Dominguez has some experience. And Orion Kerkering came up from the minors. He has that nasty sweeper that he throws, and he has closer experience in the minors. So I kind of feel like maybe they're grooming him long-term to wind up being the closer there.
I think they are grooming him. Again, if Hader doesn't sign here, I think you're going to be stuck with the Rob Thompson floating closer, which was the coin or the phrase he used to pen his, way he was going to do it last year. And it was Alvarado for a little bit, but then he got hurt, and then it was Kimbrel. And then when Alvarado came back, he worked more as the highest leverage guy. Hoffman kind of came out of nowhere and became a leverage option. I think early in the season, they'll bounce back and forth between Alvarado and Hoffman until they feel like Kerkering's ready to go.
All right. It's good for me because I drafted him in one of my gladiators. So let's go. Also awesome name, right? Orion Kerkering. I mean, that's just, come on.
Yeah. And of course, me, when they showed the video of his dad crying when he first went in there, that just, that tugs at the heartstrings. So got to pull for the kid. Yeah,
for sure. The Pirates, David Bednar, no surprise there. For the Padres, no more Josh Hader. They signed Yuki Matsui this offseason, who has like 239 career saves in Japan. And they also have Robert Suarez. It's kind of interesting because Suarez, righty, throws hard. Yuki Matsui, lefty, smaller guy, doesn't throw very hard, but he has all this closing experience, and they just gave him, a decent-sized contract. So what do you think? I think the Padres one is pretty interesting.
If Suarez is healthy, he'll start the year as the closer. How he performs, is it big time Bobby from the playoffs, or is it the Suarez we saw last year that was a little bit too prone to giving up home runs? Hopefully if he's at full health and he has a full spring and he's working okay, he should open in the role. And we'll have to see how Matsui. There's always an adjustment period for these guys coming over. And if you remember when Suarez first got here from Japan, it took him like a month and a half to really adjust to Major League. And there's a difference in the size of the baseball. And we hear this, I jokingly was saying in the group chat about Matsui, I'm like, yeah, they're talking about he's 5'8" and his hand size. And one of the guys is like, what is this, the combines? I'm like, well, it's a thing though, because the MLB baseball is bigger than heavier. So, I think there might be a little bit of a growth curve for him, but, maybe by June, he's working his way into a shared save pathway, especially if Suarez is struggling.
All right. For the Giants, it is Camilo. Go ahead.
I said there's not a lot of upside right now in that bullpen, so I don't know.
Yep. For the Giants, it's Camilo Doval. For the Cardinals, we know Ryan Helsley started the year as the closer, got hurt, missed a ton of time, ended the year as the closer. Giovanni Gallego's still on that team. What's your feel for the Cardinals?
It should be Helsley. It's very weird. In the first half of the last 2 years, Gallegos has more saves than Helsley, but in the second half, it's not even close. I don't know if that's something with Marmol, the team. I don't know. It should be Helsley. And I do like keep an eye on that Riley O'Brien kid there. They had the video from Driveline, and he was the closer in the PCL for the Mariners. That kind of picked him up in a, under the radar acquisition. That's just, in case something happens with Helsley, that's somebody to keep tucked away in the deeper formats.
All right. For the Nationals, we have Kyle Finnegan and Hunter Harvey still in that bullpen. Finnegan, for the ups and downs, the way he started the year, still finished the season with 28 saves. Do you think he begins the year as the Nationals closer?
That's what the team's saying. And this, at some point you think they have to trade him or Harvey. They've got to do something during that rebuild, and that's a good way to do it. So I think they let Finnegan start in a role, and then they might flip him midseason and then put Harvey back in there if he's healthy. But, Harvey has the stuff, Ken. Does he has the health DNA to be able to make 60 appearances? That's what we want to know.
All right, let's slide over to the American League. For the Baltimore Orioles, they signed Craig Kimbrel. He will be their closer. The Red Sox, we have Kenley Jansen. The White Sox, kind of like the Rockies of the AL. It's a mess. Does it even matter? I don't know. Gregory Santos is hurt. Not sure he'll be ready for spring training. They have Garrett Crochet, who a couple of years ago looked like, all right, maybe he could be the closer of the future. He's got some pretty nasty stuff. What do you think about the White Sox?
I think you and I will let other people get the gray hair, but yeah, it's not a warm fuzzy when they're saying Santos may or may not be ready for opening day. It's like, well, what does that mean? We don't know. Crochet, if his velocity's up in spring, I could be interested, but the White Sox might be another tire fire this year. I don't know that I want to be there. They did have a guy in the AFL, Jordan Leisure, who did pretty well. They picked him up in a trade during the season. So that would be a name in like keeper leagues to kind of keep tabs on and see how he does in spring, and if he breaks camp with the team or gets an early call up.
All right. For the Guardians, we know it's Emmanuel Clase. If he gets traded, Greg, who do you think would step in for the Guardians?
Well, they said they got Barlow for high leverage situations, so I think Barlow's the backup plan if they decide to trade Clase.
And obviously does have some closing experience in Scott Barlow, so I think that's a name to watch there. For the Tigers, Alex Lang, kind of some hiccups last year. The control, we know, could be very off and on. It's very spotty for him. Jason Foley, I think, a fine backup, but doesn't get too many whiffs. Alex Lang to start the year?
I don't know. So hopefully after this, you'll go check out the projections thing that I posted on Reliever Recon. But there's a sleeper here, and it's coming from the team president. And when they signed Shelby Miller, they said, we got him because he could do multiple innings, but we also think he has stuff for high leverage situations. And in his contract, there were clauses for games finished. So I would think Miller went there because the team kind of hinted to him that there's a chance he could be closing games. So I think Miller's somebody that we want to track, especially if that split finger fastball he brought in last year really sticks. And we know the Dodgers help guys add their arsenal and enhance. So this could be a situation where he picked up something from LA and takes it there and parlays it into a larger leverage role that he would never have gotten in Los Angeles. All
right. For the Astros, my guess is Ryan Presley to start. He's been pretty solid the past couple of years, but people seem very excited about Brian Abreu. I know he has great stuff, but I think as long as Presley's kind of doing his thing, I don't know that it's going to happen for Abreu.
Yeah. But on the flip side of that, if you're taking Presley, especially in a draft champions, then I really think you just want to have Abreu as insurance. You don't want to risk not having him there if that's part of your build.
Fair enough.
That's just me. I just, again, he was one of the 5 that had 100+ strikeouts last year.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt he's got nasty stuff. It's a good handcuff, as you mentioned, Brian Abreu there with Ryan Presley. For the Royals, the 2024 World Series champion Royals, because they signed Will Smith this offseason. They also brought in Nick Anderson, James MacArthur, pretty good finish to the season, kind of ended in the role. What do you think about the Royals on opening day?
What I think is you're going to have a little patience, because I think MacArthur's going to be like this year's Alzolay, where he doesn't start with a defined role. And then he proves to the team that he is the best pitcher in that situation. And then they finally figure it out by like June or July and then let him go with it. So I think they brought in the veterans just to make sure. It's like, MacArthur's K to BB was ridiculous in September. I think it was 19 strikeouts at one point to no walks. And he got a couple of saves near the end there. And not to mention, one of his saves was going through the heart of the Astros order. It wasn't like he was getting saves against East Podunk. He was matching up with tough competition. So, but I think they want him to earn it. And I think they brought in those guys, to help him understand how to be a major league reliever, because he used to be a starting pitcher. So again, you can take MacArthur, but again, patience, because this is going to be one of those things where like you drop him in May because you're pissed, and all of a sudden he's getting saves in June. You're like, why did I drop him? Because, I think a lot of people did that with Alzolay last year.
For the Angels, Carlos Estevez, I think he got to the 30 save mark, but finished pretty rough. And they drafted Ben Joyce a couple of years ago. He throws extremely hard. Do you think it's Estevez's role to start, and then they kind of see how it goes? What are your thoughts on the Angels?
As they're currently constructed, they'll probably let him open in it just because of the money. I get the thing with Joyce because he's got the gifts and he throws 100. He can, he wants to throw 105 miles an hour. But as a professional, he's yet to appear on back-to-back days. As a professional, so I'm talking AA all the way up. He has not pitched on consecutive days yet. So that's my concern. It's like, how can I say this person's going to be a closer if he always needs a day or 2 days in between? To me, the arm to watch there is, I don't know. Again, all of these guys are like the same flaw. They throw hard, but their command's all over the place. Jose Soriano's an arm I'm watching there too. I really want to see how he does in spring. He had a very good September, and he kind of did the Doval path where he's throwing his sinker more than his four seam now, and that pairs well with his curveball. So if what he did in September sticks, which was 11-1 K to BB, maybe he could challenge Estevez early on.
All right, let's go to the Twins. Yohan Duran, there was some concern last year. Rocco Baldelli at times hasn't just leaned on that one closer, but he did last year. I think we assume the same in 2024.
Yeah, and I put in the FTN draft guide, the Degas column that I did, that if anybody takes the Felix Bautista pathway towards a breakout year, Duran's 2023 underlying numbers are very similar to Bautista's in 2022. So, I know we kind of see him in this way, but he only had one multiple inning outing in the second half last year. They really moved him into a leverage set role as opposed to the HLR.
All right, for the Yankees, my guess is it's Clay Holmes to start. They have been linked to Jordan Hicks, Robert Stevenson, some whispers of a Josh Hader there. But do you think the Yankees go out and make a move?
I think they have to. So, and we spoke off air about this. If they sign Hicks, they kind of see him being a multiple inning option. So he would kind of be more towards the Michael King role that's vacated. King started the year as the, 4 or 5 out guy, and he grabbed a couple of vulture wins and did stuff, and then they kind of stretched him out. I think they see Hicks in that same light. I don't think they would bring Hicks in to be the closer. Now, if they went and added Robert Stevenson, Clay Holmes is in the last year of his arbitration window. So, he's a free agent at the end of the season. So the Yankees, if they sign someone like that, then it might be, hey, we're looking at Stevenson to take over the ninth and do this going forward. And they can use Holmes in those high leverage situations, especially when they need ground balls in those big moments. So, It really depends on who the Yankees sign and how they structure that bullpen. Holmes has been solid. I just don't know if he has the swing and miss stuff that we want from our top end closers.
All right, for the Oakland A's, it sounds like they're going to give Mason Miller a shot, we think, right?
Yeah, I got panned for that out at First Pitch Arizona because I had hinted that a beat writer was saying that. And now that it's coming to more light. So can he do what Duran did his rookie year? I don't know. So, and it really depends. It's like, will the A's use him strictly as a closer, or will they use him sometimes to get 5 outs at the end of a game and then give him a couple of days off? So we don't know. But, as much as we poo-poo the A's, I mean, Trevor May had 15 saves in the second half. So, I mean, they do generate some. It's just a matter of, especially at home. So their home ballpark kind of helps. So I'm okay getting Mason Miller if he was like my third closer as an upside play. I don't mind that. So we'll have to see how that plays out. Trevor Gott could be the backup to him, and there are also whispers about Urseg, but we don't know how that's all going to play out.
All right, for the Mariners, I think we assume it'll be Andres Munoz. They do have some other interesting names in their bullpen. Matt Brash. I know Prelander Baroa is a prospect that people are pretty excited about as well. What are your thoughts on the Mariners?
Yeah, it's all about health of Munoz. He missed time last year, so can he put in 65 innings? There was a lot of injury issues early in his career, and then he had that 2022 just massive breakout season. Last year, he kind of regressed to the mean. So will the real Munoz stand up, and what can we count on him from moving forward? He's another one that's going to be all about the slider. What's that slider look like in the spring? Because his second half was not terrific.
All right, for the Rays, it will be Pete Fairbanks. For the Rangers, for now, it's Jose Leclerc. But again, basically everybody predicted Josh Hader to sign with the Rangers this offseason. They could trade for a Devin Williams. I think that's possible. So Jose Leclerc, if you're doing early drafts, I'll just say be very careful with him. And then for the Blue Jays, Jordan Romano. Let's wrap up with this, Greg. For those people drafting now, very early drafts, some late round dart throws. People are doing these draft champions and gladiator leagues where there are no waiver pickups. So you kind of just need to hit on some of these dart throws. I'll throw 3 names out there, and then you could throw however many you want to. But Orion Kerkering, who we mentioned with the Phillies, Ben Joyce with the Angels, and Joel Payamps with the Milwaukee Brewers, who are some names that you like as dart throws.
I'm going to come out of left field with one of them here. I whether it's now or at the trade deadline, the Red Sox are going to trade Jansen, and they're probably going to trade Chris Martin. So I think Garrett Whitlock is going to get himself back into the 9th inning at some point with Boston. And I think there's a chance, depending on when they trade Jansen, that he gets double digits or more. So even in a gladiator, I think Whitlock's in play, especially as like your last pick as a third reliever with upside. And in draft champions, I think he's even more alluring because he's not really, he's going at about the same, his price point in the drafts is kind of all over the place, but I like where he's going. I'll go on the opposite end. I'll go with the early one of Jeff Hoffman. That's going to bridge to Orion Kerkering. I think Hoffman at his price point, again, too. I had a little note here about Hoffman. I cheated for you here, but he was 7th in the National League in WHIP with 0.92, 9th in strikeout percentage, 33.2. And his last 23 games, he had a 0.65 WHIP with a 26-5 KBB. I mean, it's a 20 inning sample, but it's still pretty good. He's no one's free in a draft, but he's going at a point where it's not a high level of risk if you're taking him to get, even if you get 10 wins plus saves, you're getting value at a guy that you can match up in there and help you in the tough week matchups. I do like Baroa. I think at some point he's going to factor in that Mariners bullpen. I'm glad you brought him up. He's somebody I hyped early on. I do like Abner Uribe in Milwaukee. And I think there'll be a few more surprises, but I talked about Soriano and a few other people that I'm kind of keeping an eye on in these bullpens where there's a big gaggle of a mess. So we're gonna have to see who emerges in those spring games.
Yes, awesome stuff there again from Greg Jewett, the owner of Reliever Recon on Patreon. He writes for The Athletic, contributes to Baseball at HQ. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at GJewett9. That's GJEWETT9. Greg, thank you so much. Anything else you'd like to promote while you're here?
Oh, just again, you know, you guys make sure you're following everything Frank's doing. He's a better person than he is analyst, and you know we appreciate everything he does for the fantasy community. You know, you see him in person. He's the same, happy, outgoing. It's tremendous. You know, he met my son, welcomed him with open arms, and it's just awesome stuff. But yeah, reliever recon. I mean, we've already put out. I can't even count how many, but there's 8 player profiles already on the site. I do like the new collections tab on Patreon. It lets you do stuff. And yesterday I published all 30 teams, my projections for the teams as currently constructed with 3 years worth of data. There's more charts than you can shake an eye at, but there's analysis in there. And we're just trying to give you pathways towards saves at this early stage. And I update those projections. I think last year I did 4 machinations of them. So I'll probably plan on something similar. You know, it's one thing to read the steamer things, but it's another to say, this is the number that they've been producing, and this is where I think they're going to get dispersed throughout the season.
All right. Awesome stuff. We're going to wrap there. For Greg, I am Frank. Thanks as always for tuning in to Fantasy Baseball today. Please make sure to follow and leave a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify. Happy New Year. Make sure you have some fun. Stay healthy as well. We'll be back again next week, next year. Bye-bye.